Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming to Google. This is the third in our series of artist lectures at Digital Arts at Google. I recognize some of you having been here before. Thank you for coming back. I'll take that as an endorsement. Digital Arts at Google is a new program trying to investigate how we can use the tools of art and aesthetics to enhance people's understanding of information. The art we selected for our first exhibit was all balanced around the sort of interface between data visualization and data-based art. And the artists we have this evening to speak to you epitomize that balance. That, you know, there is data visualization on one side, and there is art derived from data on the other side, and in between there is a magic space where you can create representations of information that are both beautiful and surprisingly informative in unexpected ways. And with that introduction, I'd like to introduce Martin Wattenberg and Fernanda Viergas, who are, is that the way you pronounce it?
Yes, yeah.
Who have for many years been among the forefront of scientists in data visualization, and who are artists in this area as well, and who I was delighted to discover a couple of weeks ago have joined me as colleagues at Google, which means I get to work with them. And they're here to talk to you about their work and their ideas, and I won't say anything more.
Great. Thanks, Josh. So we thought we'd give you a sense of a lot of different projects. We're going to end up tonight talking about the project that we have outside, Flickr Flow. But we thought we would regale you with some of our other visualization projects. And to start with, we're going to show something that you're all probably very familiar with. Here, let me just. There. Okay. So it's a project based on Google Suggest. It's called the Web Seer. And let me see if I can find out where we put it. Yes. So if you go to Google these days and you start typing something, so let's say art, you know, you can see what Google is doing is it's suggesting to you a bunch of possible continuations to the term you have just typed, right? And so this is called Google Suggest. And basically, these are some of the most popular queries that people have entered into Google based on the word or phrase that you just typed yourself. But it gets more interesting when you realize that people are not just looking for, you know, keywords. They are actually asking questions, right? So you get a sense of some of the most important questions in people's lives these days. So what we decided to do is to actually go ahead and visualize some of this information. So let me see.
It's a very important question.
There. Okay. So let's say I type why doesn't he, right? And basically what I'm doing there is I'm visualizing exactly the same information that Google was showing me before, except that now I'm dealing with size and thicknesses of arrows. So the bigger the font, the more people are asking, the more popular that query is. But then the other fun thing I can do is compare that query against another one. So I'm going to say, why doesn't he versus why doesn't she? And I can see what they share in common. And I can also get a sense of how the two genders are different, right? Why doesn't he call me? Why doesn't he kiss me? Versus why doesn't she leave? Or why doesn't she just leave, right?
Do I need the microphone? Or if I talk like this, am I?
I think they're being
we're being recorded. All right, I'll just use the mic. Okay, so let's look at the post-dating phase. And let's see. Let's think about husbands and wives, say. And why? What is our? Should we do? Why is
Or is my...
Yeah, let's look at what people are asking about, sort of, is my husband versus is my wife, and you sort of see the kind of interesting, I don't know, end of the honeymoon, I guess you might put it. It's actually, the longer you look at it, the less funny it becomes, but it also becomes sort of an interesting window into what's going on in the world.
So continuing on with the family life theme, how about turning to kids? Is my son versus is my daughter? And you can get a sense of the different anxieties that parents have depending on the gender of their kids.
I will say that we have shown this at various different places in the country. I don't know what Google is doing with this because I have no inside information on that. But I will say in different areas of the country, you get different results for this. Here, it seems like New Yorkers are worried about their daughters being overweight, whether their sons are gifted. We did a demo in the South where is my son homosexual was by far the largest worry.
And is my daughter pregnant?
Yeah, so I think there's definitely, I think there's something going on. You can also ask sort of more meta questions. Let's take a look at how to be, and we can see the things that people want to be, maybe what you'd expect, except ninja, emo, I don't know. But then, just to get a little bit philosophical, let's look at how to pretend to be. And interestingly, the intersection there is happiness.
How to pretend to be pregnant?
Makes you wonder.
Yeah, absolutely. So because no demo is complete without politics, we can now ask, are Democrats versus are Republicans? And you get a sense of the confusion around.
But, there are things that we can look for points of disagreement or agreement here. We can say Democrats are and Republicans are, and there's where their paths cross. Okay. Yeah. So, this is sort of an interesting thing. I think you can start to see that by, visualizing what people are saying, you actually get an interesting window into what's going on. And we want to sort of step back for a moment and say, sort of, how did we get here? And actually, one of the first projects that Fernanda and I worked on was a visualization of Wikipedia, which I'm sure I can get back to our slides if I, let's see, oops, not that. Help, PowerPoint, where are you? There we go. All right, so our first project together was visualizing Wikipedia. And this was back in 2003 when Wikipedia was fresh and new. No one quite knew how it worked, and we decided we would try to figure that out to the best that we could. We looked at Wikipedia articles like this one on chocolate, one of our favorite subjects, and we realized, anyone can edit it, and when they do, they leave a trace. It's actually sort of a boon for data scientists that Wikipedia keeps track of everything that happens to every page. And we realized, okay, this is a lot of data to sort through. We need to visualize it. And we came up with a method we call History Flow to show what's going on. And the idea is if you've got multiple versions of a Wikipedia page, or really any document, but we'll focus on Wikipedia, you can visualize it as follows. You can draw every version as a vertical line. So that's what you see here. And if there are multiple authors, you can color parts of the line according to who wrote what. So here, the line's length tells you the length of the document, and initially Mary wrote the first part, then Suzanne added a little blue area at the end, and so forth. To make it easier to understand, we can connect the passages from one version to the next that remain the same. So here we can see that it's very clear, for example, between version 3 and version 4 that Suzanne inserted a little bit of text. And we can play other games as well, where we can say, all right, instead of giving every version equal space, we'll space it according to the time between versions. That will give you a way of drilling down and showing the actual text behind each version. So the question is, what does that look like when you actually apply that to real data?
Okay, so this is history flow, and what we're looking at right now is the evolution of the article on design on Wikipedia. And I have this little wand here that I can bring back in time, and you can see how the text of the article. Oh. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, this is better. I can hear myself. So if I move my little wand, I can see how the text of the article here changes. And I can just follow the evolution of the article this way. So what I can do is look at slightly more controversial topics, such as abortion. So I can see that, for instance, this is, let me bring my wand here. This is a really, really long article that goes on forever. But the interesting thing here is that I have these black gashes, right, on the visualization. And what this means is that at some point, the entire article was deleted, basically. Someone just vandalized the page and just deleted the entire article, okay? And then eventually it gets reverted to what it was back. Over here, someone, on top of deleting the whole thing, said abortion is great. And then, abortion is good. And then it got reverted. And what we saw by looking at the visualization is when these things were taking place. So if I go back to the first vandalism act here, I can see at the very bottom, this tells me when this happened. So it was on the 17th of December at 4:06. It got fixed on the same day at 4:07. So it took them a minute to revert it back, right? So when we started, and we started seeing this in many, many pages, so we got in touch with Wikipedians and we're like, how are you doing this? How are you fixing it so fast? So it turns out that Wikipedians have this thing called a watch list, and you can sign up to watch different articles, and then you get notified when people make changes. And this is how they were making the changes. They were reverting back the vandalism. Now, let's look at our last example here, which is one of our favorite, as Martin said, our favorite pages, which is chocolate. So immediately you get an interesting pattern, right? I saw this and I was like, I need to have a scarf that looks like this or something. Any ideas, anyone, about what the zigzag might be? It's an edit war, okay? Two parties are going back and forth about whether something belongs on this page or not. So someone has put something here, and then it keeps being taken out. And I can show you what that is. So back here, this person inserted this little piece of white text, which is this paragraph here that says, extremely rarely, melted chocolate has been used to make a kind of surrealist sculpture called collage. And it survived for a while, right? Until someone said, removing Boyer invention. The user who had put it up his name is Daniel Boyer. So Daniel Boyer comes back and says, reverting, chocolate collage is not a Boyer invention. Person goes back, well, Google search for chocolate collage finds only Boyer. Reverting, leave your humbug out, reverting, and so forth. Until Daniel Boyer just gives up and lets it go, which is unfortunate because it turns out that chocolate collage does exist. But basically what this visualization did is that it showed us so much data at once that we could very quickly get a sense of what was sort of normal behavior on Wikipedia and what was sort of a problem or was vandalism, because it does look different, because you just get a sense of what is abnormal when you have so much data that you're looking at.
So what else can you look at when you have a lot of data at your disposal? It turns out there's a bunch of ways of getting at things that might surprise you. I mean, the Wikipedia is very internet-based, but you might ask, what about the body? And so Fernanda and I started a project, the Flesh Map project, to look at how the body is treated in various ways. And one of the first things we did is we were wondering, how do people sing about the body? You know, how does it come up in song? And, you know, you can get data on this, that you can find lyrics all over the internet. And, you know, before we knew it, we had a little database of 10,000 songs and their lyrics. They were divided into 11 genres. And, you know, in a long session of brainstorming, and we came up with 83 names for body parts. And we thought, okay, we're going to look genre by genre and see how often each of these body parts is mentioned. And, you know, it's no trouble at all to make a little computer script that does this. And you can quickly compile lists like this, for example. So in folk songs, in our sample, the word foot was used in 1.09% of our sample. Okay, not super compelling. You can make a bar graph. It's not very compelling either. But what's interesting is that when you start to graph it using imagery, and we found, you know, a great place to get some, you know, sort of stock photography that we could use for this, suddenly you start to see what's going on. So here you're looking at a bubble chart. So each body part is sized, the area is proportional to how often it comes up. So you can see that in folk music, it's sort of eye and hand and face music with a little bit of lips and some knees and ears. And it makes you wonder, what about other genres? Well, let's take a look at blues. It's also very simple. You get a lot of eyes, face, but you see arms, you see knees. Maybe you wonder why so many knees. I don't know. People could be down on their knees a lot in the blues. What about other genres? What about heavy metal, for example? Well, here you suddenly see a greater diversity of body parts for sure. But it's still largely, you know, eye and hand and face. And it turns out that that's basically the story across genres with one exception, which is hip hop. And there we can see some of the most prominent body parts in a single glance. And also just, again, the great diversity, you know, the body the figures more prominently here. We can actually line these up instead of doing these one at a time and get a kind of matrix and just see sort of at a glance, you know, the eyes, the hands, and other parts that sort of are highly prominent. Yes, we have a question. No, we did not do disambiguation. So in a way, I think this seriously undercounts certain words where there is slang that is not. Yeah. So yes. Yeah. We do not have a euphemism detector. That would be a subject of future research, though. This is all. Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
So this is part of a series that we did trying to visualize aspects of how we relate to the body. So another aspect that we were interested in is how do people think about desire when it comes to the body, and more specifically touching. And how could you know, you might wonder, how can you visualize something like that? It's so subjective. How you're even going to get that data? So basically what we did is we decided to map hundreds of points on the human body, both female bodies and male bodies. And this is what sort of the map looks like. And then to gather the data, we actually decided to turn to the web. And we used something called the Mechanical Turk by Amazon, which is a marketplace for very, very easy tasks that people get paid to do. So what we did is we created an interface where people could actually rate how much they wanted to touch or be touched on different parts of the body. And we pay them money to do this. And actually, within a couple of days, with hundreds of people who had given us answers to that. So just to give you a sense of how much you get paid, you know, very, very simple tasks like, are these items different? These are some of the tasks that get posted on Mechanical Turk. You might get like a penny for that, you know. If you are doing, if you are identifying things on an image, you know, that's more expensive because that takes more cognitive power. So you get like 5 cents and so forth. And so basically what we did is we teamed up with Dolores Labs, who basically is a startup that does all of the sort of form creation to Mechanical Turk.
I think they're called CrowdFlower now.
They changed. And this is what our interface looked like. So basically what we would do is we would show you the person, and then we would highlight different parts of the body of the person, and you would tell us, you know, oh, that would be really great to touch, or that would be a really great place to be touched on. And then we got that data in.
The scale was 1 apple to 7 apples. That's
right. And so, oh, let me go back and let me show you how that actually works. Okay, so we decided to visualize the data in a couple of ways. So this is a place where we do sort of heat maps, and this is all available on flashmap.com. You can go here and click on compare, and these are the results. Oh, actually, this is not showing up. There. Okay, that's better. Basically, what we're showing here is a heat map of the frontal male and female, and obviously the closer to yellow the color is, the more intense, the more desirable that those parts were. And you can see that obviously there are results that are very obvious here, right? We were expecting these results. But there was some results that might not have been so obvious. So for instance, if I start showing, this is the back of the female, and on the left I have how much females desired to be touched on these different parts of their bodies, versus on the right, how much their lovers wanted to touch them. So you can see that you have areas of difference there. The main area that's different is the nape, the back of the neck, right? And it turns out that women are much more interested in being touched there than their lovers seem to realize. So keep that in mind. For some reason, we were expecting a lot of interest on the feet. Not so much. And you can start playing these games with all different kinds of combinations. So here's the map for the male back. And again, you see that there's quite some difference in terms of how the points of interest are distributed.
We can also visualize this in a sort of more photographic manner. This is, let's see, is everything showing up here? Let's scroll a little bit. So we can say, all right, let's take a look at this and create a kind of cartogram where we've tiled the body, and then we can see which places sort of recede into the distance or increase depending on how much they want to be touched or be touched. We also can sort this out. So in fact, we can now just rank order all the points in the body according to our survey of where this woman wants to be touched or where people want to touch her. And in fact, women were saying the nape was actually #1 in this particular survey. You can do the same thing with the front of the body, with men as well as women. You can then collapse it back and put all the pieces back together again. So it becomes a very interesting way to kind of get a sense of, both the body overall, but just the collective view of the body. In some ways, I think one of the most interesting things about this was looking at blog comments, where some people were saying, oh, this is exactly what I've expected, there's nothing new. And other people were like, this can't be right, look at the feet. And you felt like the blog commenters themselves were telling us a lot about their own sensations so that maybe they didn't realize. It was very, very interesting. So from this, we want to segue into our current piece, which is a fascination not with the body, but with color. And let's see, let's get back to PowerPoint here. And the sort of first round of our interest in this particular series of colors began when we were contacted by Wired magazine to do a piece for their anniversary. And we're trying to think, well, okay, what characterizes Wired? Well, among other things, the colors that they use for the cover. And we thought, is there a good way that we could extract the key colors? We came up with a relatively simple algorithm that basically says, all right, we're going to take the color cube, divide it into little buckets, and so we get 6 by 6 by 6 little cubes, count the number of pixels that fall within each bucket, And then look for buckets that are particularly large, that have a lot of pixels in them, ones that stand out from their neighbors as local maxima, and then average the values within those buckets to kind of recover the original colors. So scientifically, you can think of this geeky image up here as a way of describing what we do. But the results are actually kind of neat, that, you know, we can take these covers and then get these sort of pure common colors that they use, arrange them in concentric circles so that these covers that you see would sort of be reduced to these bullseye patterns that characterize them. And then you can sort of take an entire matrix of colors. In this case, they're arranged by time. So from top to bottom are years. You can see the first year it was just a bi-monthly magazine. Left to right are months. So December is at the left, and January is at the left, and December is at the right.
And I was just going to say, this is the 15 years worth of Wired magazine covers.
And then when you can kind of reduce them into this poster, and you can start to see sort of interesting patterns. I mean, besides the fact that it can be kind of fun to look at these, they're almost like little insects or something you're collecting. You can immediately see from this how, in January, they like to start the year out with very clean, simple colors, and they get more complicated over time. You also get a sense that maybe the art director changed, and they started liking darker colors towards the end of their tenure. So this was sort of our first salvo in visualizing color. That actually reflects the circulation at the time, so that this was another sort of layer to the piece that they wanted.
So to continue on with our fascination with color, we got very interested in this notion of extracting the peaks of colors from images. Now, one of the things that happens here on the Wired magazine covers is that we are aggregating so much that we are reducing an entire cover, an entire image, to a single circle, right? To a single series of concentric circles, which is interesting, but it's not the only thing you could think of doing. So the next piece we created is called Luscious, and there what we were interested in is to work within the composition of a single image. Okay. To work with the composition of a single image and start abstracting away from the content of the image and just looking at color. So basically, this is what Luscious looks like. We were interested in ads from magazines, those very glossy, beautiful, fashion magazines. So this is an example where we took an ad and created a Luscious piece. And one of the things that's interesting here is that you start to realize how sophisticated these color palettes are, right, from photographs. And then you start to realize some tricks that our eyes play on us. So for instance, when you look at the image on the left, you might realize, okay, so this is a yellow pear on a brownish sort of dish, right? One of the things that might get lost is that the highlights on this brown dish are very, very blue. And you can immediately see that on the Luscious, on the circles, the way the circles, sort of the blue circles pop out on the left there. You can also see how beautiful the play is with darker and lighter shades of green at the very top. So these are all very, very careful choices that the photographer made, and that, because we're looking at the content, sometimes they get lost. So we decided to start doing that, pointing the Luscious algorithm to a lot of different kinds of ads. So this, for instance, is a Valentino piece. And it's interesting how you definitely get that splash of red that Valentino is known for. It's also interesting how much skin you see on the left versus how little skin tone you see on the right. And then we just keep running with it. So this is an Absolute vodka ad, which tends to be very heavy on the color. This is a Camel ad, and we actually like our version better than the original. Very different color palette, very light. Fendi, a double spread ad by Fendi. And even Oil of Olay displaying this really amazing palette of yellows.
So once you have sort of a machine like this for extracting colors, you want to run with it. And our final piece, which is showing out there, is work where we took photos of Boston, of the Boston Common, over the course of a year. So we took thousands of photos and extracted these colors, taking the timestamps into account so that we had the characteristic colors for every month of the year. We then arranged them on a circle. Let's actually see if I can get that. So here are the colors, and created a kind of graph of the waxing and waning colors of Boston. In fact, we can go to our interactive version here. And you can see on this graph, we go from December, and we have like the cold, cold photos of the snow and the icy sky. And then gradually spring comes, you can see flowers and the colors there, then a bulge of green in the spring and the summer. You get, a little bit of raininess in August, and then by fall again, you can start to see the leaves, the fall foliage. So as we go through this, we use Creative Commons photos. So we have the credits here on the right, which create a nice element in and of themselves as I move. This sort of gives, I think, a view of Massachusetts that certainly to those of us in Boston kind of rings true, where we feel like the time has been revealed. So with that, I think we'll finish up. And thank you very much.
We can take a couple of questions. Anyone? Okay, well, they'll be here later. We can talk. Our second speaker this evening is Brad Paley. Brad and I met at a visualization conference about 8 years ago. Something like that. Yeah. When he was proselytizing one of his works, one of the four works he has out in the exhibit. And I was looking for interesting new things to think about. And we found, at least from my point of view, we discovered that although Brad had come into the world of data visualization from a design background primarily, that was my impression at the time.
Okay, good. Then I've reformed because I came into it from a coding and fine arts background.
And I had come from a very scientific background. We had come to a place where we had very similar ideas about how to design computer software interfaces, but completely different arguments about why those were the right answers, which made, sitting and having a conversation over a beer fascinating. Since then, Brad has, I guess, roughly split his time between designing highly usable computer applications for a living and creating really cutting-edge data-based artworks, which have been shown in most of the major museums in New York and around the country and the world. As I said, there are 4 of Brad's pieces out in the lobby, which I think give an interesting cross-section of his work, and he will give us a different cross-section of his work.
Thank you. I'm going to start with the 4 pieces out there because that's the things you're familiar with. They're all medium old. TextArc, which should be coming up in a moment here because I double-clicked it. These are relatively large files. And yes, switching computers. This is my new tower replacement. I replaced some big noisy energy sucker by the side of my desk. And it's way faster. So I suggest doing that if you have something more than 2 years old. So this you saw out front. I'm going to show you an interactive version of it. I wanted to show this first because in a very funny way, this version out front is more interactive than the live one. And I'll point that out. Mainly, the main reason I want to do that, I'm used to seeing one screen. So if anybody wants to move over here, I'm going to point at this one because it's the brighter of the 2 screens. I should have counted people, but I'm too much of a projector geek to follow people. I want to follow the brightness. The main reason that I think this is more interactive is one of the things that TextArc was built. It was built as a tool for structuralist literary analysts, people who can make some kind of hypothesis or deduction, mostly hypothesis, from the structure of a book. which then they can go and read the book to find out if it's true, but you know, a different way of looking at a book. So if you'll notice, this Dormouse, Hatter, Duchess, and March Hare, they're all in roughly the same place. Hello, we need a hand. There we go. They're all in roughly the same place in the text arc, the lower left-hand corner. These have a very similar shape, this kind of broken witch's broom. This has a similar shape. This is a very different shape. I put those things in, call them distribution glyphs, because they show where each word is distributed throughout the entire text. So I'm going to take a step back and show you the live version, but I wanted to point out that the print has enough resolution that I can actually draw the distribution glyph for every one of them. There's no way you can do that on a screen. And if you think about human visual acuity, one of the things that we're trying to play to is as visualization geeks, you can make you can take the entire contents of this 1024 by 768 screen, and your eye would be able to resolve all of that on a piece of paper about this big. You could take any of the slides that we're showing on this screen and see all the detail, you know, about 18 inches away and about this big. Which means that if you're truly trying to get across a lot of information, and changes in information aren't that big a deal, you're better off not necessarily having such a paucity of information spread out over such a big thing. Put it onto this big, and if you do have space this much, then you can have roughly, what would that be? Say 50 times 50, who knows what 50 squared is? You can have 100,000, a couple 100,000 times as much information and instant access to it. In this case, the high resolution allowed me to draw those, and you can instantaneously say, these are of a family because they seem to be mentioned in the same places. And I'll show how a distribution glyph works in a minute, but it was tuned so that its shape would allow you to group things that were used in similar, words that were used in similar places in the book. And this one has a very different shape. So if I'm thinking about these three as kind of as a 3 or 4-headed character, I can see that instantaneously scanning around. The human brain is not very good, contrary to what we all feel, at remembering images. Very few of us have eidetic, how do you pronounce that word? Have a photographic memory or bridging on that. Mostly, there was no evolutionary pressure to develop a good visual memory because the world was always there. And if you looked away and looked back, it was there again. So there's no reason for me to keep a whole visual model of it there. So no selective pressure means why waste your amino acids and sugar on it. And therefore, if you had to do something like this in an interactive version to see what things were, that's the code, part of the code to it. By the way, now the structure. Every line of the book, Alice in Wonderland, every word of the book, Alice in Wonderland, scattered around in the middle. I'll tell you how in a minute. It's thinking about what color to make them there, redrew. So I'll tell you what the structure is of a text arc, and then I'll tell you about the visual analytic processes that people layered on top of the structure afterwards, myself and a few universities who are using it for its intended purposes. And I want to really strongly distinguish in this early 10-year-old work the difference between the structure of the visualization, which is a geeky color and space trick, from the use of it in the pursuit of humanities issues. And I want to suggest, and I'm going to show you some of my most recent work, just from a couple of years ago, ironically for the New York Stock Exchange, which embodies some of my most humanist work. That's very ironic, right? But it's the structure and the task and the meaning are much better integrated in my more recent work. And so I want to call out the fact that the structure here is very clearly a geeky mathematical trick. What did I do? I took every line, like I said, and drew it around the outside, and every word and drew it around the outside because I wanted to get the entire book on one page. Second rule, there are only 3 rules here. If you have to make up rules, it's good to have few of them. Because if you have to force somebody to learn your rules, to read your visualization, it's nice to be able to do it in a couple of sentences like you guys did, as opposed to have to train them for 15 minutes before they can start to understand how the heck you're organizing the information. So rule 1, put all the information up and put it in an arc. Rule 2, if a word's used a lot, make it bigger. Maybe it's important. It should draw your eye. And rule 3, scatters them around. It's kind of a spatial hashing function for those who codes here. Okay, I won't use too much of that jargon. It's a useful jargon. If most of you put your hands up, then I could get into all kinds of questionable mappings between how the brain works and how computers work. But you've saved me from all that. I don't have to. It's pretty much bogus analogies across the line anyway. But still, we don't have cycles, and you don't have bandwidth in your head. You use sugar, which is related, but sugar takes longer to get to places than bandwidth does to reallocate. So be careful of those analogies. All right. Alice is used everywhere. Notice, by the way, because this is on a screen, I couldn't draw the distribution glyphs. The pixels aren't small enough. It would have been a terrible mess. Not that it isn't now, but it's a little bit of a structured mess. Rabbit is here. Mouse is over here. Why is mouse over there? Well, the rubber bands pulled it over there. Rabbit is kind of here because the rubber bands pulled it to the centroid, or a tut embedding if you're a mathematician, or a force-directed placement with uniform weighting. How about that? Rubber bands are better. Not just because I'm trying to play down to you. I never play down to an audience. I've always noticed that I've never had to dumb anything down, even for people on Wall Street. I've noticed that you can put. Here's an irony. You can put 4, 5, 7 times as much information on a page as people think they can absorb. So in other words, when they cry information overload and say back off, I usually go in and say, no, let me triple that. Let me quadruple the information. And the more information, if it's properly presented, actually makes it easier to read, more comfortable to read. And that's something that is not working here. I was working against how human beings evolved and how our eyes and cognitive processes work here. But I'm working with those processes in the later work. So I'm going to talk just for 2 more minutes here because I want to show, I've shown you the 3 rules of the structure, this averaging trick, which scatters the words around, show all the words in an arc, and make something bigger. Here's an example of a visual analytical technique layered on top of that structure. You remember Duchess was used in very different places from Dormouse. Now here, imagine you had to scan over every one of these words, right? And remember the shapes, and try to compare those shapes in your head to see whether Hatter and Dormouse and March Hare were all mentioned in the same place. It's an impossible task. It's just not possible, no matter how good a memory you have. I would suggest. So depending on the nature of the data, strangely enough, prints are better. Hatter, Dormouse, and March Hare all appear here and here. They appear nowhere else. I coined the term ensemble character because as far as Lewis Carroll is concerned, and as far as the dramatic development of the book is concerned, they aren't separate characters. They're less than one-dimensional. They're 1/3 dimensional because altogether they're just one-dimensional. So they're really kind of trivial characters, but they play well off of each other. And the fact that they play, that fact is elicited by in this representation just by the shapes here. Again, Dormouse is something else. I used to say that King and Queen were another ensemble character. But somebody in a lecture once said, no, Brad, by your own rules, they are mostly appearing together, but they're not. Why is Queen appearing out here? That's what foreshadowing looks like to Lewis Carroll. Lewis Carroll knew that the Queen was going to be such an important character here, and less vociferous, but no less important in the ultimate chapter. He wanted to make her really have a lot of impact when she first came on the stage. So in one of the few cases when I was actually lecturing and thinking at the same time, that person, what I did was I said, oh, well, let's take a look at the text and see what those early references are like. Here they are, by the way. Just like, they're pointing to places here. If you've got a scroll bar is the map of your data. And if you've got a highlight, you might as well play it out in the scroll bar so you know where to get to them. So what we want to do is, and I also rigged the scroll bar so that when I click it, it just takes me to each of these references. So these are him saying, an invitation from the Queen. From the Queen, an invitation for the Duchess. Invitation and Queen. First of all, the Queen hasn't appeared. She's just being referred to. She's going to come in the future. Secondly, Lewis Carroll said it and said it again. Good way to get something into memory. Third, he's playing to what we understand as human animals, more animals than human. By the way, your eye evolved over 500 million years since the Cambrian explosion. There's an argument that, a very good argument, that it was the eyes that drove the species explosion around 500 billion years ago, when we only had 5 kinds of fuzzy worms underwater, and then within 30 million years we had almost as much, maybe more diversity as we have right now in terms of forms. Eyes drove that and are 500 million years old. To give you some context, your forebrain, the symbolic way that you read information, right, is only 4.5 million years old, as opposed to, I can't even stretch that far if I make this 4.5 billion years old, right? Million. So wait, 500 million years old, 4.5 million years old for your forebrain. Human beings have only existed for 100,000 years, which is pretty neat when you realize that civilization is 2,000 or 3,000 years old. 2 or 3% of the time that we've existed in this form. We had civilization in China that long ago. And language is arguably, symbolic. Use of symbols is like 40,000 years old. So it's an absurd waste of human processing. We are mostly animals to try to feed information to us symbolically with words, except when you can rely, and you can't with all kinds of information, but when you can rely on the earlier parts of your brain, visual processing and cognitive recognition and categorization and things like that, you can get amazing speed ups and benefits, which is exactly what we try to do, right? We just try to push things earlier and earlier into a visual pipeline. So the reason I brought it up in this context, another thing that human beings do very well is understand social relationships, like alpha female. And Queen is an alpha female, so Lewis Carroll picked that person. He didn't say mock turtle. He said Queen because he wanted you to remember it. Arguably, this is. I haven't had a chance to talk to him about this. Hope I never do. But it's so. And then finally, game. If you've read Wittgenstein, game is structured. He uses that term a lot in his examples, because it's a really hard thing to nail down. But it's basically structured human interaction. And as animals, we're incredibly good at understanding other animals and social, how we come together and go apart and things like that. So he did that, and he basically did that for all of those references. There's another one, and then finally, so he went 1, 2, just when you're about to forget. 3, just when you're about to forget. 4, just when you're about to forget. 5, 6, and then she comes on the screen. Musical structure, beautiful, amazing, amazing work. This is why and I'm sure you do visualization, because we get to look at the geniuses of the ages and really understand them on a different level, or the genius in the world as a whole, as opposed to individual people, which is what you were just showing. So that's an analytical tool that was discovered after the fact, because before the fact, all I was doing was trying to spread the words out, hoping that that my colleagues and I could figure out ways to use this spread out stuff. So that's 10 years ago. We'll jump to code profiles, another piece out there, which is about 9 years old. Hey, why are you not zooming? Oh, please. Oh, it's a very big file, and it's still reading in. So I'll tell you where it came from. Christiane Paul, a curator of digital artwork, saw me talk about text art and invited us independently to participate in something that she put at the Whitney's online site. She is a good postmodernist. I'm not sure she would like being called a postmodern curator, but she understood those issues. She wanted to show off computer art, but she wanted to show off how it was made. We all know where painting comes from, because we did painting and finger painting or whatever in kindergarten at least. But she said to us, she picked 10 computer artists, make some work for me, but also show me the code, and I want to show the world the code so that people know what's underneath computer art, not just the pretty face of it. So I was kind of at a loss because I like to deal with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of points. And her aesthetic agenda to us was, oh, move 3 points in space. You're an artist, you know what to do with that. And in fact, I didn't. And this is maybe why I don't really self-identify as an artist. Because 3 points, I didn't have it, I can't say anything with 3 points. It barely makes a triangle. You did great work with a triangle by layering other observations on top of it, Martin. But so later I realized, fortunately she asked 4 months in advance, and like 3 weeks before the deadline, I said, oh, any space I want, right? Yes. Is code space? Yes, code can be space. Okay. So I'm going to write a bunch of code, and now I can move 3 points through space because I have a whole bunch of code. What points? Well, I'm going to move an approximation of your fixation point, so how you would read it, following her curatorial agenda of expecting people to read the code. So, by the way, the aesthetic breakthrough, the break from my writer's block, as it were, or drawer's block, was when I gave up trying to be an artist, and I said, well, what's her agenda? What's she trying to do? Let me just interpret that onto the page, and then it all became really simple. So the space was code. People were going to read it, so I traced the fixation point through. That's the amber line. You can see this running live outside, by the way. I finally hooked up the projector again. The amber line just reads simply through. The green line, which is just kind of ghosted here, this is actually probably 10,000 calls from a routine into here. So that's the execution point. And the white line is my insertion point of how I wrote the code. So this, I got beat up by a colleague, another friend who was in the same exhibition. And he said, well, gosh, it's really Baroque. There are all these curves, and I'm extrapolating a little bit now, but it is a mess. And Baroque is fair. It's got a lot of curves there. And he said, well, I would be much more interested in this work if it was like the minimum thing that would draw itself on the screen, which is a neat trick if you go to MIT and you're focused on that kind of elegant computer problem. But I was focused on human communication and the Baroqueness, this stuff. Notice that these lines are perfectly straight. That's the following of the execution point around here. There's no reason to think there's any flow. The computer just kind of jumps from one place to another. When I was writing the code, though, I was in a flow state, what Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi calls a flow state. He's a person who studies optimal human performance, intellectual and even emotional states while you're doing your absolute best. And I was in a flow state when I was just ripping. Every bit of information was just right there at my fingertips. Boy, I wish I could do this in my life more than 2% of the time. But so I was, though, at this point. Thank you, Christiane, for inviting me to do this. And so it was completely, absolutely inappropriate and wrong to draw that as a straight line. It should flow. In fact, I used a natural cubic because that had an even more flowing feel to it than a B-spline would. I mean, there are various ways you can draw curves on a computer. So this is a bit of a direction away from just the raw presentation of data on the screen, trying to interpret it in a way that's more associated with how people are going to read it, what task they're going to use it for. So now I'll do very quick discussions of these two. This is my most successful failure. No, I don't care. I say it's successful because it was published in Science and Geo and Discover and I can't remember, many magazines, and I still to this day, even though it's many years old, get requests for people to use it in their thesis or on their wall in the science department or something. Every spot is a different area of science. The lines are kind of like those rubber bands from TechStart, saying we told every spot to push away from all the other spots. However, we held the areas of science that were related to each other together with similar rubber bands to the ones that I used in TextArc, and that's what created this shape. So all the organic chemistry stuff is over here, and it's kind of related to physical chemistry, which is kind of related to applied science and physics and astrophysics. You know, so these things are all related to each other. I invite you to look at that if you want. I added this because this is actually just kind of a curiosity, not really a tool, and I pride myself on being a tool maker of late. Try to anyway. And so this does become a tool, though, when you take that map and say, oh, well, the United States is heavy in medicine and social sciences and doesn't do much of the mathematical stuff. Canada and United Kingdom are pretty similar. Australia is similar. France and Germany and Spain are very well rounded. See how their spots are pretty evenly distributed around the whole space. China and Taiwan are pretty much very complementary to us. So if you're doing a startup, you might want to, and you need tech and humanities and medicine, you may want to involve people on a couple of different continents. This is the saying. So this, I was calling it a failure because the very thing I think that made people really want to use it in these various settings is completely an artifact of a bad algorithm that I designed to lay out the text. So all of those hairs was called a flying spaghetti monster, or I can't remember what other things. I thought it was a feather boa. You know, I was just trying to, instead of just putting spots on the screen, or spots rather on the print. No way you could do this on a screen. Spots on the print. I wanted to label each one with the words that were most commonly used in that area, because then it becomes fun to read through the whole thing and see how the concepts are related to one another. The reason I call it a failure is because it looks hairy, because it's drawing much more attention to itself, and there's no information driving this shape. I mean, if they all were slightly curved like this, then it would elicit the kind of humanist understanding of science, not as a dry technical discipline, but as a humanist discipline, as aspiring to understanding the human or the physical condition as novel writing or painting is. But science is like that. We outside of science don't necessarily know that, so I was trying to give it a little bit more of a human face. And I think that would be enough. But all this nasty stuff is just, it's drawing your eye and it's drawing your eye to faults in my algorithm. Serious failure. I would mark somebody's C on that. Fortunately, I didn't have anybody I was deploying to that was quite so mean about this. Now, the last thing in the show. So you see, I hope you're seeing there's kind of an arc here where I'm trying to make tools that are more understandable by human beings because of things they already know, or because of things they're already pre-wired for. This is the last thing out there. It's a calendar. I think I'm proudest of this. I'm certainly proudest of this of any of the things out there, even though it's sparse. It's very regular because the data that I was showing is very regular. It's it's hours in the day. Oops, not you. There. Hours in the day, and it's a pretty much it's pretty similar from day to day. I mean, there are a couple of days that are a little bit funny, like this one. 12, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's daylight savings time. You roll back and fall. There's a double line just because that's the beginning. It so happened that that Friday both started and ended this year, or started and will end this year. Okay, so this thing though I'm proudest of because if you're interested later, I can talk about the agenda. It has an insidious existential agenda. I'm a child of the 70s before semiotics, and we were interested in existentialism. And the point of this was, if you mark something on here and then do your email for a minute, and you look up and you say, oh, I marked that, but it's already 2 hours have elapsed. I'm tying recognizable flow rate of your minute to minute, or at least hour to hour experience to the entire year. And I was trying to scare us all, letting us realize, we almost never, there's very little, it's very hard to tie big numbers and small numbers together. Remember my 500 million years of eye evolution and 40,000 or 20,000 years of linguistic evolution? It's really hard to think of those in the same mental breath. And this was me trying to span a couple of orders of magnitude. I actually did an even scarier one that turned out to just be a design gesture. It wasn't going to be useful. This thing could be useful if you mark things on it. Actually, we have somebody who's used it more virtuosically than anybody in the world in the audience here. You've sent me pictures of using this to really plot out things. And the idea is that you might see some patterns in your life. This isn't about, this is graph paper on which to plot your life, basically. But the scarier one that I did, I was almost going to do for 2010. It wasn't going to be useful as a tool, but I could collapse all these together and spiral in, and it would have had to have been a little bit bigger. But I could have put an entire decade on a page and still show you hour-to-hour changes. And I really liked the idea that, for the rest of my life, I've got like 2 productive pages, maybe 3. And once I turn those pages, I'm into senility, and then I might have another extra page and a half, And I like to threaten myself, and I suggest that it's a valuable thing to do if you want to get up out of bed some morning when you don't have to, and get something accomplished. This thing, the main reason I'm proud of it, though, was not necessarily that agenda, some of which I admit was formed after I made it and looked at it and thought about what it would be useful. I don't have to explain this to anybody. I just hand it to them. They figure it all out themselves. Why? Because red for weekends and out here is a standard typographic structure. Okay, is a standard typographic way of showing things. Certainly, the features of January, February to December are things that people recognize. They eventually recognize that, this is hump day, the low part of the week, and this is the high part of the week, the weekend, at least at the top part of the, that's so the frills around the outside are showing weeks. There are something, somewhere between 9 and 12 aha reactions that I've intentionally engineered into this, because when I give it to you, I want to make you feel smart. I want to give you that ability to look at it and figure stuff out yourself, because we all love that, right? And the only reason that that's possible is because you're so smart to begin with, and I'm just giving you something that has features that, if you trust me enough as a visualization person, you will look at and say, Brad must have done this for a reason. He's not somebody who reads in random numbers and vomits colors onto the screens because they give you, 2 seconds worth of visual retinal titillation. He's not one of those guys. There are many of those guys, mostly guys. When he puts a mark on the page, it means something, and so then you have an excuse to look into it more deeply, and those excuses all come around, the intention of an author trying to get meaning across and leaving a breadcrumb trail of breadcrumbs, recognizable features that you'll be able to tap into. So now, I want to show something that I didn't do, and then I'll give you just quick glances of more recent work. So I was going from 10 to 8 to 6 to 4 years old. This is not my work. God, I wish it were. It is about 150 or 170 years old. It does, I want to suggest, far better information visualization than I may ever get to, and that I think almost anybody in the world is able to do. It's a page from the 1810 Encyclopedia Britannica. And why do I call it? Why am I so enthralled with this? It's just, it's just an engraving, right? Here's why. Trying to get across the message. You want to give people aha reactions. You want to tap into things that they already recognize. You want to give them features to allow them to understand and discover it. I don't have to tell you for a second. I don't have to say things, but I will just to show you this approach to understanding a work like this. No, thank you, Photoshop. Go away. Oh, thank you. Okay. Elevation, plan. You knew that. Why? Because the elevation is drawn like mountains, and the plan is drawn relatively flat. This is swampland, this is farmland, and this is a structure. I didn't have to tell you that. You instantaneously, pre-attentively, before the third of a second that it takes for a stimulus to get to your forebrain, this thing was already parsed. It was already recognized to you before you even saw it, in a sense. There are really cool magical tricks you can play with your mind when you realize that people live a third of a second in the past. There are ways to get information into their heads in a tenth of a second or 2/10 of a second so that it's already there when they come aware of it. And that's the essence of making a good tool. And that's what this person did. This is a phenomenal tool. And just one other thing. So the features that I was talking about that are breadcrumbs that allow you to instantaneously recognize things and distinguish things, I want to suggest that when you draw something, every distinct intellectual category should have a distinct visual vocabulary that you draw it with, because then they're as instantaneously distinguishable as this and you people here. We are built, we are evolved to make instantaneous pre-attentive distinctions between things that look different. And so I can look at the people and ignore the chairs, or look at chairs and ignore the people. He allowed us to do that. And then even more virtuosically, he tied the plan and the elevation together with this dotted line overlay. Dotted lines indicate virtual or intellectual things. And it's just gorgeous stuff. I want to zoom into this. I know I'm over the 5 minutes. I'm gonna, but I am excited to share this with you. So I just want to show the amazing detail in this and the beautiful resonances, visual poetry that the waves aren't really that big. But we know it's water because he's referring to waves, right? It's not a slavish translation of the real world. It's not a photograph. It's a reinterpretation that allows us to parse it and understand it as information much more easily. The punchline for this, by the way, is that that's the real size. It's this big. And anybody who wants one, I printed up a bunch. I'd be happy to send you. Finally, in the -4 minutes I have left, I'll show you. Leave if you want to. I really apologize. But there are ways that you can turn this into more quotidian things. This is work that I did for the New York Stock Exchange, and I'm trying to learn how to distinguish things that are really important to look at, things that are temporary post-it like overlays on information, things that are paper-like because they're forms with the square corners versus screen-like because they're round corners, things that are basic information and interpretations of the information. And this is how you can start to put in 2, 3, 4, 7 times as much information that people are asking for. And the information, if it's related, and if you visually layer it properly, and draw it so that it's instantaneously recognizable in this pre-attentive way, so it's recognized before you see it, in a sense, before you're conscious of it, it becomes paradoxically more comfortable. Why? Because it's feeding our visual and cognitive processes in the way that the real world does. And all of a sudden, it becomes as effortless as looking around in a room like this. Reduce this room to a spreadsheet, right? It's going to be a 150,000 line spreadsheet if we ignore most of the interesting stuff. And that's going to be a useless spreadsheet. The only reason you can look around this room and do this, I'm hoping that I'm doing for some of my clients, and I promise I'll come back to, after I retire from Wall Street. I mean, why am I doing this on Wall Street? Because they happen to be able to make money out of this stuff, and they're willing to fund it. But I'm going to bring this stuff back into probably nanotechnology or some positive technical humanist thing. Different layers from different kinds of information, and you can see I'm nowhere near as virtuosic as that anonymous person from 150 years ago. We all have a lot to learn. I invite you guys to join me and surpass me in this stuff. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was a good hour and a half. 45 minutes.
Okay.
Are there any questions? Please don't wait on me.
There's been some discussion about Apple's products, especially their apps on the
Yes?
They include a lot of tactile, physical.
Great stuff.
And there's been some debate as to whether that is a way forward, or whether it's just an archaic thing and they should be instead pushing to develop new paradigms. And others say, as you said, that it makes it easier for people to approach them because they
Yeah, so the question was that there's been discussion about Apple using very physical or physics-based bits of the interface. Like, for instance, on the other hand, when you scroll past the end of a list, it lets you, and then it gently pops you back. You know, all sorts of things like that. And the debate evidently is, should we hearken back to this plain old physics fake stuff, or should we be inventing new paradigms? And my somewhat glib but mostly heartfelt answer is yes, absolutely invent completely new paradigms for demonstrating data as soon as our wiring has changed. That's going to be another 500 million years. So I think that those people who are on that side of the argument, you know, actually it may not be 500 million years. There are arguments that if you survive the next 100 years, and most of you under 20 probably will, or most of you under 30 probably will, then you'll be uploaded. And then it might be much quicker to change some of the hard wiring that I have to take for granted since I'm 52 and I'm going to die in 50 years. But well, I mean, you can turn it into the behavioral version of chart chunk, right? You know, where oh, is it really enhancing my ability to deal with this to turn the page? I think it's I said I was being somewhat glib, but mostly heartfelt. If you're to really address that, there is a simple, you know, thing that you want to do. You want to say, given the hardware of human perception and the software, as it were, of I lapsed into those nasty analogies anyway, didn't I? Excuse me. And the software of human cognition, categorization, and things like this. Given that, set that aside. That's what we're feeding. Understand what the task is. If you can be true to the task and tie into some physics stuff like that scrolling past the end of the list is beautiful, because it lets my gut know that I'm scrolled past the end of the task, and I'm tapping into the hardware and the learning that I've done about physics in the real world. If you can align all of those interests, then absolutely do it, because what it does is it offloads that information from your forebrain to your body, and the key thing about that is that it lets your forebrain go on and do what it was supposed to do. I do not go to my phone to use a scroll bar to find the end of the list. I go to my phone to find a human being, and if my fingers can take care of going through the list, then my mind can think about that human being, and it's freed up to think about other human beings. So, yeah.
So if you really want your users to know something, then it should look like a lion lurking in the bushes.
Absolutely. One of the problems with the thing that I just showed you, remember there was an alert that was bright red in the middle of the screen. One of the problems with that is I'm misaligning interests in a way that I'm trying to avoid. That thing was the brightest, prettiest thing on the screen. And it's the most dangerous damn thing that can happen to a specialist on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. So they know after a while, oh yeah, I better be aware of that. But you know, there's some part of them saying, oh, pretty, I want more of those. You know, and they really don't. So I misalign these myself. Yeah. I pointed at this gentleman first, so probably because his hand went up first.
You mentioned hardwiring. Yeah. I mean, I think it's debatable how hardwired things are. Like Richard Dawkins would has pointed out things like, for instance, if you grew up on a planet where, let's say, you have practically no gravity, the speed at which things happen, like a bouncing ball or something.
Yeah, we would learn that other thing. I didn't have in 35 minutes enough time to do all of the proper academic escapes and cautions in that. I think of it as hardwired because as far as
scroll bounce back when you put it in the car.
Right.
Well, if you
We are amazingly flexible within certain limitations, and that's a question to talk to psycholinguists and cognitive scientists about. Point taken. I take it as a designer, I'm not a cognitive scientist. As a designer, I take it as given because most of us grow up in a pretty similar world. However, your point does bring up the point that we grew up in a similar world with respect to physics, but not with respect to culture. And so if you want to use red as hot in physics, and you think that that means a high number, and you go to Wall Street and you proudly show them a visualization. I did this 20 years ago, where I used a heat map, and they said, let me get this straight. Black is low, and when I'm in the red, that's good? Oh, okay, fine. You know, the different cultures have different color mappings, and we need to be aware of that. It's part of our ability to learn. Yeah, which will work unless you're, you know, in China where it's up and down, or Jewish where it's backwards. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, need to take advantage of your culture.
I thought it was really very interesting to hear you talk about the benefits of feeding the brain in the way that the real world does. And these ideas of kind of breadcrumbs and visual cues that you recognize before you're conscious of them.
Exciting stuff.
I'm wondering if you have any ideas about the third dimension in data visualization and spatial memory. There's something called the ancient order memory,
where you visualize a room that you're, or a structure, and you put ideas in the structure.
Right, and you use physical locations as bookmarks for ideas. And I'm wondering whether you see that as a powerful tool in visualization.
Yeah.
Talk about
Well, think about what that is, by the way. Yeah. You're using your eye and what your eye has created, which is this remarkable ability to deal with space and remember spatial structures. And you're using that to leverage something that we really weren't built for at all, which is memorizing lists of things. So you walk through the space and you leave this idea here, this idea there, this idea, you know, here, and then when you walk through the space again, if the things are tied with the space, yeah. So they're doing that was high tech, very high tech when the Greeks, I guess it was, did that stuff. I'm not sure I'd call that the third dimension. I think that's still, I mean, you know, I think of three dimension as three-dimensional visualization stuff, and it's a hard thing to pull off well. And I'm interested to see somebody do it. I'm not sure I have seen anybody do it yet. We can talk later if you want to talk. Yeah, because it's volumes worth of stuff, and I've only read half of one of the volumes, but at least we could have the beginning of that talk.
My question is actually very related to that. This excitement in mathematics where this Poincare conjecture has been solved.
Okay.
Which basically says higher dimensional spaces don't act like dimensional spaces produce.
Oh, okay, fine.
So, for example, there's something called the exotic 7 sphere. You start with an 8-dimensional cube and sort of sand off its edges so that you shrink it down to a sphere.
Okay.
Which is what would happen in 3 dimensions or 2 dimensions. Well, in 8 dimensions, there's 28 different kinds of spheres. They're all spheres. They all have constant curvature, but they're not shaped the same.
Interesting.
It's such a strange idea, we can't even...
Yeah. Well, there are 3 kinds of parallel lines you can do even in our universe, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And that was the start. Obviously, that's something not maybe as simple as it. And it seems like that this is a big dilemma for you guys who are in higher dimensional spaces, sort of making the claim that things like the notion of the nearest neighbor is as simple as it might be if I project my thing down, or if I take my touch points and I chop them up and put them on a 2-dimensional grid, claiming these are the nearest neighbors. But if you're in a higher dimensional space, where never mind we take in the age of the people, the sexuality, the color, but you're in this. It's the same problem. The fellow who has Pandora. It's a lot of complaints like, how comes when I'm listening to my rock and roll, all of a sudden I hear this Madonna? And he's got 60 parameters that he's measured.
Yeah.
He's in 60-dimensional space, claiming that it works.
Yeah, but you know what? I mean, if I gave you a list of stocks and and their prices today, yesterday, and 2 days ago, you wouldn't necessarily call that a 3-dimensional space. There's no continuity. There's no sense of whether it's bounded or not. I mean, you know, we use dimensions in kind of a wonky way. I mean, you know, when somebody talks about a 60-dimensional space, it has nothing to do with the 11 dimensions in which we live, and the 3 of which we're aware. So when you conflate those two things, it sounds like we have a harder problem than when you disentangle them. The multidimensional space issues are well taken care of by, and you guys know this better than I do. These guys know the math behind a lot of these things, like multidimensional scaling or finding eigenvectors through higher quote dimensional spaces. But the arbitrary scaling of those different quote dimensions is well taken care of by certain kinds of mathematical tricks. And the thing that I want to disentangle is the space we live in and train our brains to be able to respond to is very strictly three. You know, it's really only 3 dimensions. It's even silly in a sense to call time the 4th dimension. That's just, you know, Freshmore's trying to sound clever. You know, it's something that has no physical reality that we can tie into. You know, you couldn't just swap width for time. You know, it doesn't work that way.
No, it's a clever game.
Yeah. So I want to suggest that you're right. We could have been in danger there, but fortunately, it's just a linguistic confusion that's tying together dimensions of one sort with dimensions of another.
Those things that are the precessor, the pre-announcement of the need.
Yeah, foreshadowing.
By your own admission, those when you looked at the text, you said, "Oh, wait a minute, this is a third-person reference." It's not that queen spelled Queen is a completely different.
It's a different concept.
Place.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But on your thing, you equate.
Yeah.
And you've even led the young person who's trying to write their Alice in Wonderland that all they have to do is introduce the queen, blah, 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 and that person might, if they don't hear the rest of your lecture, they don't hear the part, oh, by the way, you might want to like put the notion of the queen in somebody else's mind.
That's a good point. So I should be careful if I give somebody a map and say, here's where the ice cream store is. I should be careful that they don't try to cut it out and eat it. And I'll be very careful about that in the future. You know, there are people who I could confuse because this is a new kind of map into thinking that this was reality. But at our best, we're showing, you know, one fractured view of an incredibly rich phenomenon, and I think we all realize that. And that's my inspiration for going on, actually, because I want to unfracture it and show 2 views before I die.
Yeah, we have time for another go.
Okay. Yes.
So you talk about feeding your brain in your how it likes to be sort of fed. And when I see that diagram you put up with the Mohana,
Yeah.
Like you get this feeling of like elegance, kind of.
Oh,
and
it's so
also
beautiful.
When you slide your finger, you get the bounce. It feels really good. But when I'm like walking around looking at the rest of the world, I just kind of ignore most of it, right? Like.
Oh, that's true. So the very interpretation is focusing your eye on it. Maybe that's where the art comes in. That's what ours are supposed to do. It's not impossible to do that. You can, Victor Vasarely, for instance, a pop artist of far too high stature compared to his talent, as far as I'm concerned. Is he still alive? Is this going on in the air? Okay, that's good. That thing. But you know, was able to draw things that were much more realistic looking than real than they could by actually Salvador Dali, whose early work I respect very, very highly, intentionally did something that your retina does. It takes a high level of light and a low level of light, and your retina has cells that span the receptors under the low light and the high light, and the cells, retinal ganglion cells that span those two, say, ooh, this is bright and this is dim. I'm going to make this one even dimmer and this one even brighter. So the apparent profile at an edge is like this. And Salvador Dali said, well, I'm trying to make things that are illustrations of things in dreams, which are more real than real by definition, because dreams are just meant to, some people would say, work through an emotion, and you invent objects to help you work through the emotion, and the objects have to be more real than external reality because they are built from the forms of internal reality, the perfect Platonic ideal, right? So that they are truly more real than this stuff. So Salvador Dali was trying to illustrate that. And so he took this, which your retina does, and did it even more. And that's one of the visual tricks that he may or may not have even known he was. I mean, he knew he was doing it. He applied every one of those brushstrokes. I don't know if he knew where it came from, retinal ganglion cells. But it's certainly possible to feed the machinery that we have to engage with it even better than reality. And it's a really, really hard thing to do, though. But it's, I wouldn't expect us to. I'm sorry. But, well, you know what? It just leaves me in awe of evolution and how it could have put together something so facile, so instantaneously workable. Well, of course, instantaneous on our time frame, and we evolved with the time frame, so take out instantaneous there. But it leaves me in awe of the fact that we have this machinery that can take in so much information and parse it out at so many different levels, edges and textures and people and behavior and meaning and social context and and future. So it doesn't. It's not like and it's not like confusing. It's just it's awesome in the pre-1980s use of the word.
And let's bring it to an end there. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Martin and Fernanda.